So before I say, So hi everyone, my name is Christopher Loewen from Winery Loewen, and I'm here to tell you something about our 2021 growing season and vintage for our US importers König wines. Let's talk a little bit about the 2021 year. It all started for us with a nearly normal bud break. So after a winter that was quite dry, we saw a very wet January, and we could see, finally the water in the soil was better. And so we looked forward to a good growing season due to a good amount of water in the winter. Then, as I said, we had a normal bud break. And the summer started really well because also in the Mosel Valley, we happily didn't have frosts. So probably you've heard that some areas in Europe were again hit by frost in 21 vintage. Happily in Mosel vintage, due to our cooled climate, basically that we have, our bud break is always a little bit later than in other areas. And due to this, we also had degrees under -Celsius, so basically frost, but our vines weren't, the bud didn't break until then, so we didn't have any problems. Then the vegetation, it started all very well, and the vines were growing good in the beginning due to the good water supply. And then in the summer, the flowering went very well, and it all looked as a more a classical vintage. But then what we all saw, I think, over the world, we had quite intense rainfall in July in the west of Germany. Maybe you already also heard in the news that the Ahr Valley was hit very badly. Also one part of the Mosel in the area of Trier, which is just 20 kilometers from our winery, was hit also very hard by a flooding due to very heavy rainfall. And a lot of people lost their houses and so on. So it's a really, really bad story that went over the news worldwide. Happily, we were, I still remember the day when it was just raining. We saw it in the radar. It wasn't quite sure where the water will go on that day. But happily for us, the intense rainfall went a little bit more north from our winery, so that it just hit Trier and then going back in the Eifel forest, where the Ahr is located. That's why they were hit so bad. Here in our area, we had more or less, or in our area of our winery, we were hit just a little bit by the rain. We also had a July that was more wet than a normal average July. We had about 100 liters of rainfall more than a normal July. But that day where it was super intense was not badly intense in our town. Regarding growing, it was a very intense year, I think, for all European winemakers. After the drought of the years before, where we really were very happy about every drop of rain that fell in the 21 vintage. We got enough rain. It was very good for the vines because they were growing very good. After years where it was hard to build wood on the vines, this year you really saw the vines growing super. But of course, in that month where it was more intense in July, it was not easy to keep the vines healthy. So it was definitely a year where sprayings was very important, and also leaf work. So it was growing wise, a very intense year. And I think basically it is also a year that was a big advantage for all small growers like us, where a small family is standing behind, because this year there were a lot of phases in the vineyards where you needed to do some additional hours, which is hard to do for big wineries because you need to organize employees and it takes some time until you get the people. But it was not possible to plan because maybe one rain was hitting the winery and another day it was forecasted rain, but it went down 5 kilometers further. And so it was a year where you had to be really careful with your vines, really being outside in the vineyards every day. Thanks to Corona, we didn't have a lot of trades or visitors at our wineries, so that the whole family could focus on being outside in the vines every day and really doing the additional work that needs to be done. And so, yeah, with doing the additional hours, it was, we were really happy with the outcome of the summer. We also could keep our vines healthy, so we didn't have problems with the downy mildew, which was the biggest problem in this year due to the rainfall. Yeah, something you could also say, it is a year where we are also happy that we are not certified organic, and that also for me as a producer teach me again that for us it's not the right way to follow that philosophy, because when you did yeah, it's a very intense case, but to do it short, when you work organic, you need to do more intense sprayings and more often, because the sprayings don't go into the vine, and every small rainfall, the spraying gets washed away. And with not being certified organic, we have things that work, that stay on the vine even after rainfall. And that's a big advantage, that we needed to spray less. So I think we did, it's hard to say numbers, but we were happy with keeping our vines healthy with very low amount of sprayings. And that really leaded us the way that for our thinking, we are working the right way. Yeah, then another thing that was important this year, that we re-asked ourselves in the hot vintage if it is the right strategy, is that we did again an intense canopy management with defoliation. So what we did is, in the flowering, we took a lot of leaves in the zone of the grapes away, so that the big advantage is that you loosen up the canopy and wind can blow in between the grapes. And so you have the big advantage that after a rain, the grapes dry out very fast. It has a disadvantage in very hot years and hot areas, that you have intense sunlight directly on the skin, and that can force some phenolics in very hot years. And that's the reason why we asked ourselves if it is still the right strategy in hot vintages like 18. But for the colder vintage like 2021, it was definitely the right strategy, because it helped us to ripen the grapes and also to reduce the amount of sprayings, because the grapes could dry out after every small rain very, very fast. Yeah, then happily the end of the season was drier again, so that the grapes could ripen perfectly at the end of the summer. And it was not, yeah, they could ripen quite well at the end of the summer. And due to this, we could get a very late picking, basically a vintage that was in historical ways normal in the Mosel Valley. So we could start picking mid of October, and we had about 3 weeks of harvest, which is too short for new days in our winery style. It was very interesting to see that the ripeness level measured in sugar weren't getting higher in the harvest, because the vines were slowly ready with the vegetation, and the leaves were turning yellow. And so the photosynthesis stopped. Due to this, the sugar content of the grapes weren't getting higher in the harvest, but it was very interesting that the aromatics did develop very much in the last days of harvest. So we saw that it was a big difference if you did pick the grapes beginning of October, where the flavors were still green and unripe and more like green apple and very yeah, harsh acidity also, honestly. And it helped a lot to keep the grapes longer on the vine, because the acidity was getting lower and the flavor profile changed a lot into very ripe yellow fruits like apricot and peach. Yeah, we were quite happy with that. Because of the wet period in the summer, we had in between our top vineyards a small amount of botrytis. So we decided, after 3 years without doing selection, we decided to do a first run through all vineyards in the beginning of October, to get the botrytis out of the vineyards, especially the vineyards to make dry wines, because for our sweet style, we like to have a certain amount of botrytis inside, to get more body into those and more length. So the dry wines this year are made without botrytis, and due to the reason that we took the botrytis out, we could let the grapes ripen a little bit longer again, because at this point we had 100% healthy grapes. We picked them at the end of October. Very happy, honestly, with the results. It is a vintage where the sugar amounts basically are lower than in the last 3 years. We were quite happy also with the higher qualities that we could get. The aromatics are tasting really, really good. We were happy that we could pick at the end of the harvest Auslese Gold Capsule, Beerenauslese, 2 different Beerenauslese, and at the end, on 23rd of December, also a happy ice wine. Yeah, I'm really happy that in the year where also my firstborn son was born, in Karl, by the way, I could do some wines that I hopefully will enjoy with him on his 18th birthday and maybe his marriage someday, we will see. But definitely we made some really great predicate wines also to age for several decades. And that was, of course, in such a year, very important to us. Yeah, then basically in the harvest, the processing of the grapes was done in the normal Karl Loewen style, which means the hand-picked grapes, or basically the grapes, they go by gravity into the press. They get pressed directly without a maceration time. They fall down into the cellar by gravity, so without pumping. And then after sedimentation, they go into natural fermentation. Due to the late pickings and the philosophy that we have in our winery, that we don't like to work with cooling or heating systems in the fermentation, the grape juice was very cold, due to the late picking, of course, because the must temperature is, of course, colder end of October than the beginning of October. And that lead to about 2 weeks that the juice was standing in the barrels and not fermenting. So it took quite a while until the natural fermentation started. But I'm really happy with it because you saw that the juice was developing in those days. Yeah, the fermentation, when it started, was doing quite good. A part of the vintage is still fermenting. That's quite normal for us that we have such a long fermentation due to the, we have all wines are still fermenting in a classical cave cellar under the earth. And due to this, the temperature in the cellar is cold and the ferments need their time. But that's also the reason why, in my opinion, we don't need bâtonnage or anything like that in our wines, because we have about 2 or 3 months fermentation where the yeast is in contact with the wine. Yeah, the wines are tasting really, really good. I like it a lot. That we are on the alcohol levels light, but not clean in aromatics. So for me, a perfect combination of low alcohol but fully ripe aromas. The natural fermentation was going very well. You don't see a lot of reduction in the wine, which normally you see some days with natural fermentation. But due to the amount of rain in the summer, the vines were building a lot of nutrition for the juice. And that's the reason why there was no lack of nutrition in the fermentation. And that's why also no reduction was built. So a very, very intense, pure and elegant vintage where I like the outcome quite a lot. Yeah, Gabe is also on the call. Maybe he has some questions to me.
Yes, yes.
Maybe some things that I forgot.
No, that was comprehensive. Thank you very much, Christopher. In terms of the total quantity, do you have, is it a normal vintage in terms of what you picked and what you have in the cellar now, or is it slightly smaller?
So it will be a super big vintage. No, just kidding. I think there is no producer in Europe that had a big vintage. But honestly, we are quite happy with the outcome. As I said, we really did an intense work in the summer. And also, for an example, neither me or my parents drove to vacation this year because it was just not possible. We didn't find the time. And it was more important to do the work in the vineyards. But if you did so, it could be good. And that's what I think we showed. Due to this, we see, in terms of quantity, of course, not like 18 or 20, but a little bit less than an average vintage, but not a catastrophe like maybe other producers have in this year.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Christopher.